So far in this series, we've worked with a variety of different variable types, including Boolean values, which are true or false, string variables that can contain any character content, and numbers such as integers. In this video, we're going to explore another variable type called an array. An array is a little bit more complex, but you'll also find it to be tremendously useful as we work through the additional examples in this series. So go ahead and go to your resource pack directory, and let's go ahead and open up the 8th step in the strings and variables folder called working with arrays. Go ahead and copy the entire code and paste it over the code in your test.php file and save it. Now, the previous variable types that we've explored contain a single value. Arrays contain multiple values. So let's start by taking a look at how we define an array. This first line here takes a variable called myArray, and we're going to assign it the return value from this function called array. The array function is what we use in order to generate an array. Unlike other functions that we've looked at so far, array can take a variable amount of parameters. So right now we have 3 parameters. You can see them each separated with this comma, but we could add additional items here to make our array even bigger. Each item that we pass to it becomes an item in the array. So this defines an array with 3 items, one called item 1, one called item 2, and the third called item 3. So far, this is pretty straightforward. If we want to add an additional item to this array, we can do so using this syntax right here. So what we do is take the variable that is an array now, and we use empty square brackets at the end, and we assign it a value of some kind. In this instance, we're assigning it the string item 4. So an array is really just a list of values. When we want to begin using the items inside of this array, we can reference it using a similar syntax that we use to add an item, except we're going to use a number inside of the square brackets in order to reference an item. When we added items to this array, each one got a key. And the key in this case is simply a number that indicates its index in the list. And it begins with the number 0. Now this can be a little tricky to remember because you might expect it to start with 1, but arrays always start with 0. So this first item that we added had an index of 0. The second one had an index of 1, and the third had an index of 2. When we added this fourth item, it had an index of 3. So when I say the word index, just imagine that we have a list of items, just a normal list, and it's numbered. We have the first one, the second one, the third one, and the fourth one. Except instead of the numbers starting at 1, the numbers start at 0. If we wanted to point to an item in a list like that, we'd simply say, look at bullet point number 2. And we're doing the same thing here when we're referencing an item inside of the array. So here's where we begin using that data. In this first line here, we're printing the 0 index item of the array, myArray, and this points to the first item, which would be item number 1. When we print that out, we're also adding a break in order to separate it from this next line, where we reference the item with the index 2. Now again, this is the third item because our numbering starts at 0. So we would count 0, 1, 2, and this would be the item that would be referenced. So when we print this out, we would expect to see item 1, and then a break, and then item 3. Now in this last line here, we're using a function called var_dump, and this is short for variable dump. And what this will do is take a variable of any kind, and it will render it into a readable string that we can view in the browser or in the browser source code to get a sense of all of the pieces that belong inside of the variable. So let's go ahead and save this and jump to the browser, make sure you're on your test.php page, and refresh. Okay, so as expected, we have our item 1 and item 3. Now again, if we look at the code, this is our first item, which has an index of 0, and our third item, which has an index of 2. And again, we're printing it out using these 2 lines. If we jump back to the browser, we see this third line here, which is a little hard to read this way, but if we look at the source code, we can see that there's some new lines breaking up the variable. So this gives us information about this variable. It says it's an array, and this 4 that's inside the parentheses indicates that there's 4 items inside this array. This opening bracket indicates the beginning of the values inside the array, and then at the very end there's a closing bracket. For each item, we'll see the index inside of these square brackets. So this is the index 0, and this is item 1. And this variable is a string that has 6 characters in it. And you see this similar pattern throughout the additional items inside of our array. Now we're going to use var_dump throughout this series in order to learn more about a variable. With a string, in previous videos, it's easy enough to print that to the browser screen and learn what the value of that string is. But with an array, if we use print and we try to print the array to the screen, we won't see all of the variables lined out like this. So we have to use a function like var_dump in order to explore all of the details.